Hello and welcome to the Soul Tree Diaries. My name is Martine. Today we're going to be exploring two of the most important transitions that we go through, or two of the most important processes that we go through in our life. And that is that process of birth, that portal of birth, pregnancy, labour, and that portal of death. Now, quite often these transitions are viewed from that joy and love of birth and that grief and sadness of loss. But we're going to, today I'd like for us to go past that emotional element of these processes. And I'd like for us to step in and look at the mechanical, engineering and biological process that we go through when we move through these transitions in life. And let's begin by exploring the portal of birth and pregnancy, that whole transition of pregnancy. Now, in past chapters, we've explored the 4 seasons of nature, the 4 seasons of our cycles, and the 4 seasons of our mother line, or the 4 seasons of the mother line, the 4 stages that we go through. So let's bring that same analogy through into pregnancy as well. Quite often, so let's start right at the beginning of pregnancy, when that conception, when that fertilization happens. Now, for so many decades now, so much importance has been put on that male input to this, the sperm element to it, of that XY chromosome, which determines the gender. Oh, hello. Good morning. I've got both magpies sitting on a tree just here, the male and the female. They've just come down to get some mealworms. Good morning, magpies. I love them. The male comes down first. He's a greedy, greedy boy. He comes down and scoffs them, and she sits up on the branch watching from above. And then when he's done, she'll come down in a moment. And they'll feed one at a time. They take it in turns. But he's always first, and she waits. And then he'll come up. Except not today. She's just come down too. They're both here. She's walking at him, going, "Get out of the way, I'm hungry." They're also nesting at the moment as well. So I'm sure they're pretty hungry. But anyway, enough about my magpies. We're discussing... Come on, brain. Yes. So for so many years and decades, we have put the relevance on to the sperm, but we have not really acknowledged the role of the egg in this. So let's rewind. In a previous chapter, we've gone through the knowledge and understanding that is, as an individual, the egg that created us, formed in our grandmas. And so biologically, we were soaking up the weather of our grandma's environment decades before we were even born. And now there's an importance to this, you see, because as women, we soak up our environments, and we know that epigenetically our environments and our experiences get passed down through our family. So the weather of our grandmother would have imprinted into the egg that was created inside us, in the egg that made us. And then as our mothers journeyed through life, we would also have been wearing the epigenetics of their journey too. So when we as individuals step into that process of reproduction, I think that there's an element of this that we massively overlook. While yes, the sperm will bring that XY chromosome, depending on which one's there. But let's not ignore the relevance of the egg in this. You see, the egg is carrying the energy of his experience and journey. And if during that their life's journey, there has not been the protection around them. There's not been that whole family. If there's that fractured mother line or broken father line, if a female is not feeling the protection of her village around her, quite often we can call in a male. If we have that safety around us, if we're feeling secure in our home, if we have the villages, then the body is open to bring in the female and birth the next mother, the next generation of the mother line from within. Now, I worked as a doula and worked with women postnatally for many, many years. And I've worked with generational wounds and generational patterns for decades. And you'll see so often women who have had challenging upbringings, women who have fractured families, quite often birth sons. I know for myself, this is very true too. As a young girl, I grew up in the military. I went to boarding school, so my life was changeable. My family, my extended family were not around me. And within me as a young child, I always said, I know that I'm going to birth a tribe of boys. And I'm now a mother of 3 sons. There's so much importance to this that we overlook. We birth as women what we need and what feels right for the environment around us. So then we step into, once that conception has occurred, we then step into our spring of our pregnancy, the first trimester of pregnancy, where all of the work and all of that energy is happening underground, where no one can see. The mother is exhausted and tired during this first trimester, as all of the energy inside is helping to sprout the spring that's coming up and growing inside. Once we've moved through the spring, the first trimester of our pregnancies, we then step into the summer, the second trimester, the month where the spring, the baby, is secured and established inside. We then step into our second trimester, summer, where we blossom. You hear it all the time. Women who are in those 3 to 6 month periods, they are blossoming and they feel full and vibrant because they are in the summer season of their pregnancy. And then we step into the autumn, the third trimester of our pregnancy. And this is when we begin, like nature, when autumn, this is when we begin to slow. This is when we begin to unfurl the outside world, and when we begin to unburden ourselves so that we can begin to prepare for the season that's to come. And if you look at nature, nature does this and shows us this so perfectly. Just look at the oak tree. In the autumn, it drops its leaves. It closes, the bark literally closes off, so the leaves get cut off. It's unburdening itself from the weight of the outside world. It draws its sap back in and back down into the soil and into the ground so that it can weather the storms of the winter without carrying the weight of the summer that it's just been through. And then we cross over from autumn to winter, from into the 4th trimester of our pregnancy. This is the stage where we go into hibernation. You see it in nature, the trees, they're all in hibernation. All their energy is sucked down into the ground. You see it with the bears and the lions and the fox cubs. When they go into the winter, once they transition from autumn to winter, a birth occurs during that transition. And as women, Our brains go through a huge transition when we step into that autumn phase of hibernation. The place once we've birthed our young, and then they've come into the world, and then they sit in the 4th trimester close to the mother. Remember, they've spent all of their time so far within our energy, within our essence. And when they're born, they, as mammals, when we transitioned from being mammals who walked on all fours to being bipedal who walked on 2 legs, our pelvises shifted shape. And it meant that our babies had to be born a bit earlier because the brain and the head would not fit through the pelvis if they were carried to full term of 12 months. So when we birth our babies at 9 months old, we're birthing them early. They are still in an infant. They are still in a fetal place within their brains. They literally only have that first part of the brain switched on, that part of the brain that is designed for seeking and rooting. During this phase, so a mother's pregnancy actually covers a whole 12 months, not just 9, because pregnancy has 4 seasons to it, not 3. If once a mother has birthed at the end of her autumn, and we then ask for her to step back into spring, if we ask for her to carry on as normal, if we ask for her to get back to work or get up and just continue doing the household chores, she will struggle, she will crumble, and quite often she will suffer mentally inside. There's such a gravity and such a weight to this 4th trimester that we often skip through as mammals. But if you cross over to the animal world and you were to look at most mammals, when they're in that 4th trimester, the mother is very close to their young. And if they're ones that go through the hibernation period, nobody else goes into the den and takes out their cub or their baby to look after it over there. Nobody would dare. The mother will have a nanny. Generally, she will pick one of the trusted matriarchal women in her family to support and help her nurturing during that 4th trimester period. Now, and if you look, I mean, even the sperm whales, when we look at sperm whales, when a sperm whale gives birth, she has the village, the matriarchy, the mother line surrounds her. And once she's birthed, they all come underneath the young to keep them up above the water so they don't drown. As a sperm whale would struggle to do this on their own. There's many cases as well where in zoos, when I think it's orangutans, well, many different species, but a story I know of is an orangutan who continued to lose her babies after birth, but she was kept in isolation during this period, and she was a first-time mother. She'd never done this before. And so on one of her pregnancies, they left her in with a matriarch, with a crone. And the crone guided her, supported her, showed her how to breastfeed, and nourished the mother. Now, in many cultures around the world, they still embrace this 4th trimester. The mother is put into the back room. She's kept safe and secure. The family around her hold the mother, so the mother can hold the baby and bond with them there. So there are 4 seasons to our pregnancy and birth. And we can't skip one of those seasons and jump straight back into spring. We would not have the energy. It would drain us. And if you look at your experience of going through that transition in life, do you recognize not being held? Do you recognize not being nourished? Do you recognize not being mothered when you were in your 4th trimester with your baby? So now let's cross this over and look at the portal of death, because the portal of death has 4 seasons too. So as women, we step into our crone phase once we have gone through our perimenopausal phase, once we have gone through the transition in our brains. The same as adolescence, we go through a huge transition of unfurling and unraveling. Once we go through our perimenopausal phase, and all the energy that was sending all the blood down to our womb space for our cycling years now gets drawn up to the heart and the brain to give us clear vision. And we know that this is when we step into our 2nd spring of life. And so a new year, a new 4 seasons begins. When we first step into crone, we are in that spring. When we are budding up into our clear vision. And then we sink in to the summer, at the blossoming of our crone years, where we get to bring our wisdom and our nourishment, and we send it back down through the family, through into the generations to come. So the wisdom we've gathered from our life isn't lost. And so that our young and the next generations know how to thrive and survive in life. And this is our summer phase of our crone years. We then step into the autumn of our life, the 2nd autumn of our life. And again, just like in pregnancy, this is when we begin to unfurl. This is when we begin to unburden the outside world. This is when we begin to slow. This is when the family gather and come closer. This is when touch, gentleness, nourishment is so vital. And there is a process to passing. There is a biological process to this phase when we begin to go, when we step through that autumn of those crone years. We begin to reduce our food intake, our fluid intake. We sleep more because we are unburdening the world, the tangible world, as we step closer to that veil and that portal of life. And so then as we go through that transition from autumn to winter, and we pass into our greatest, longest hibernation, we are unfurled and we are ready for our passing. Once we have passed the 4th trimester, the 4th season of the winter, the people left behind then come into a hibernation period. If someone has gone through a deep loss and they're asked to step into a spring and to bounce back in life as if nothing has just happened, this will cause them to get stuck in their grieving and their loss. The person left behind needs holding and nurturing, just as a new mother does with the village around her. This process of birth and passing, they are 2 of the most foundational processes that we go through, and they should be held tightly, safely, securely within our family homes. But how many of us have stepped into these phases of life having witnessed birth, having witnessed death? Just the lack of that experience can cause a fear inside. But let's also briefly explore what happens when you don't have these 4 seasons, when you're not held by a family around you, when you go into these processes and you're not feeling safe, the body shuts down. It goes into that dorsal vagus system of shutting down. This can stunt a pregnancy. This can stunt a birth. How many women have been at home birthing with their family and safety around them? And then once they've progressed so far, they then transition to hospital and all of a sudden everything stops. This is because the body has gone into shutdown. When you are put into an environment that doesn't feel safe to your body, the most ancient part of you steps in and says, this is not safe for me to birth here. The bright lights, the beeping, the changing rooms, the changing staff, the fear that you're put through once you step into that system and you're expected to birth in a schedule instead of a biological process. And this is the same with passing too. If you are held through these stages of passing, if we are held as we move through the autumn of our life, the passing is easier and the body moves through that process more comfortably. But so often we are foregoing the fundamental, well, we're foregoing this process for a medical process instead. And this removes us from our own timeline, from our own biology. And this puts us into a system and a tick box process instead. We see it often, don't we? People who in passing, so often we hear people say, well, they waited for us to arrive, or they waited for this to happen before they'd pass. This is because the thing that they were waiting for was giving the body a cue that it was safe for them to finally transition into their greatest hibernation on Earth. Right, I think these are such sacred portals, and I feel like we do not give them the importance that they actually need. So now we're just going to cross this over and we're going to look at some of the world data on this, because the world data backs this up in so many ways. So we've spoken in a previous chapter about how that oogenesis, the fact that our egg began in our grandma, and the eggs that we carry will also, if we were to birth, we would then be holding the eggs of our future generation within us, that oogenesis, that infinite portal that runs through that egg ovary line. And so we spoke about the fact that the weather of your grandmother's experience sits within us. And this is where epigenetics comes in, because through epigenetics, your DNA was already reading the stress, the joy, the light, the hardship, the nutrition, and the emotional weather of the generations that came before you. You aren't just an individual, you are a living cellular archive of your motherline. And that's the Western medicine data on this. The somatic and psychology of these portals, these baths, these passings. When we move birth and death from the home into a clinical system, we often trigger what psychology calls the dorsal vagal shutdown. Through the lens of the polyvagal theory, the ancient brain senses bright lights and strangers as a predator threat. A stalled labour or a difficult passing isn't a medical failure. It's a brilliant biological success. Your survival system is doing what it needs and was designed to do. Your body is trying to protect the portal by halting that process until it feels safe to step into it again. How often have women stalled in their pregnancy, in their birth, when they've gone into hospital, and then they're on the hospital's time schedule, and then intervention is required. Biologically, adrenaline is the enemy of the labour hormone. Oxytocin, your body cannot open the door if it feels under attack. But yet none of the systems that we step into bring this psychology or Western knowledge into practice. So evolutionary biology, the obstetrical dilemma, the external womb. This isn't just about feelings or about a parenting style of co-sleeping or baby wearing or holding your baby close for the first 3 months. Evolutionary biology gives us an obstetrical dilemma. When our ancestors started walking upright, our pelvises narrowed from movement while our brains grew larger. To ensure survival, nature had to shorten our pregnancies, meaning human babies are born neurologically fetal or unfinished. For the first 100 days, a mother's chest, heartbeat, and warmth is the biological external womb that they need to continue that growth and development inside. The 4th trimester, the winter of our pregnancy, is a biological requirement to finish the gestation process that the pelvis could no longer hold. What's the implications of missing out on such an important stage in life? We will get onto that in another chapter. So traditional Chinese medicine. They call the menopause the second spring. A biological promotion rather than a decline. And it feels like it, doesn't it? It feels like we grow into ourselves. It doesn't feel like we're declining. It's the moment where the life force, or the Jing, J-I-N-G, sorry, that once flowed downward to the womb for creation is now rerouted upwards to the heart and the brain. You are not winding down. Your biological battery is being fully dedicated to your new role as the matriarch of your generational home. You become the one who holds the vision, the heart-centered leadership, and the gathered wisdom of the entire tribe. In Ayurveda, the unburdening of the Vata. In the ancient Indian science Ayurveda, this transition into death is known as the Vata season, the season of air and ether. This explains the sacred unburdening we see at the end of the life. As the soul prepares to transition, the body naturally sheds the heavy earth elements of food, water, and movement. It is graceful, mechanical. It's a mechanical thinning of a physical veil. The body isn't failing to survive. It is successfully preparing the vessel for the shift. Reading. It's successfully preparing the vessel to shift from the density of form back into the lightness of spirit. Stepping into the spirit mother energy, the greatest hibernation. and supporting the future generations from that space. So in anthropology shows us that in cultures that still honor the sacred seclusion of the mother and the passing, the postnatal depression is almost non-existent. When a mother is held by her village and she is not having to think about the outside world, when she can sit in her winter, she moves through this process more healthily. These villages, these structures provide pillars of rest and social provisioning to absorb the mother's survival stress. Depression is rarely a depression in these cultures is rare in this phase, as the biology has been saved and kept in a sacred place. So let's look at the wild data. In the wild, we see the blueprint of the village, as we spoke about the sperm whale before, and the elephants with their matriarchs. We see this blueprint in nature, in the mother lines and the matriarchal wisdom and supporting and holding, even in cows. A cow that sees her young struggling to birth will go over and give support and guidance to them. So when these processes of birth and death are moved from the home and put into a medical system, we are trading safety for a schedule. So it's time that we began to start reclaiming these birth and death processes. When we bring them back into the family home and we allow for the 4 seasons and birth and death to move through organically, we are bringing safety back into these processes that we should all be witnessing and knowing. If you had stepped into birth having witnessed it, your body already has the experience and knowing because it's seen it and it's experienced it, so it feels safe. If you move into death having witnessed your family supporting and holding the person passing, you go into that process feeling safe and held instead. These are the 2 most important transitions and portals that we go through in life, but they have been stripped from the family home. And we are no longer holding these sacred spaces safe in our families and in our generations. Just allow yourself time to absorb this information. And maybe journal or write about your experiences of seeing how and knowing how you weren't held, and recognize that perhaps the struggles that you went through, the difficulties of those of birth, of not being held in the winter season, the hibernation, have impacted you and your journey. This is not your fault. This is a structural, societal breakdown of our generational homes. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope that this session brings some comfort or brings some release of knowing that there were things that were just missing from your experience or journey growing in your family home. Right. Thank you very much for joining me today. And you will catch me next week for our next chapter and our next session as we continue to explore the missing blueprints, experiences, an essence, an innateness of what it is to be a human on Mother Earth. Take care.